The Athletic.
G'day there and welcome along to the Race F1 briefing for Saturday the 4th of May 2024, brought to you by the Singapore Grand Prix, the home of Formula One night racing. I'm James Baldwin and this is the podcast that brings you all of the big F1 headlines you need to know in 15 minutes or less. It was sprint race and qualifying day in Miami, so let's get you up to speed. Max Verstappen took his almost inevitable victory in Formula One's 2024 Miami sprint race, but like in sprint qualifying, he seemed not to enjoy driving his Red Bull all that much in the process. Charles Leclerc's Ferrari survived a pre-race pit lane collision with Esteban Ocon's Alpine to give Verstappen's Red Bull some genuine hassle through the opening lap. But the safety car neutralised any momentum Leclerc built up. And after the restart, the Ferrari driver was never able to get within DRS range, so ended up driving the remaining 16 of the 19 laps in an effective stalemate with Verstappen. Even with Max complaining his Red Bull felt terrible, zero rear grip like qualifying yesterday, there was just no opening for Leclerc. Sprint qualifying was the most impressive thing Daniel Ricciardo has achieved in 2024, it has to be said. The best result he's had since Mexico qualifying in 2023. And when Sergio Perez ran deep into turn one after the start, Ricciardo got his RB into the top three and the podium looked on. It didn't end that way though. Perez managed to repass Ricciardo with DRS shortly after the restart, a crucial move to avoid being upstaged by one of the drivers in a lesser car looking to steal his seat for 2025. Ricciardo's RB just doesn't belong in the top 6 of a Formula One race. Its natural pace dictates it's a marginal top 10 contender, but as the tyres wilted in 42 degrees Celsius track temperatures, Ricciardo impressively clung to 4th place, despite Sainz's best efforts to attack in the final laps. Norris's poor qualifying meant that he was in the middle of the pack, where there can be some danger going into turn one, which there was. The Brit tried his best to keep out of the way on the outside line, but became the innocent victim of a three-way collision between Lewis Hamilton's Mercedes, who went into the Aston Martins of Fernando Alonso and Lance Stroll. Hamilton went to the inside but couldn't get his Mercedes turned in properly, punting into Alonso, with Stroll turning in without realising Alonso was alongside him. The stewards opted to call it a lap 1 incident. Oscar Piastri, in the less upgraded version of the McLaren, followed Sainz home to complete the top 6. Hamilton fell down the order after collecting those Astons and was running 9th behind the Haas duo of Nico Hülkenberg and Kevin Magnussen. Lewis tried several times to pass Magnussen into turn 11, and Kevin defended with typical aggression. Too much aggression, as it turns out. He copped multiple penalties for cutting the track and going outside track limits, and admitted afterwards that he doesn't like doing this, but he does need to play the game. The game in question was that the Magnussen roadblock protected Hülkenberg's 7th place and ensured Haas banked 2 points from this race. Hamilton managed to repass Yuki Tsunoda's RB for the final point for 8th after Magnussen was penalised, only to receive a drive-through penalty of his own for speeding in the pit lane. That capped a miserable race for Mercedes, in which the multi-car first corner incident condemned George Russell to a laboured recovery drive from 14th to 12th, finishing behind the Sauber of Zhou Guanyu. To qualifying now, and Max Verstappen followed up his sprint race win by seeing off a challenge from Charles Leclerc to take pole for the Miami Grand Prix. Verstappen, who has won the 2 previous Miami Grand Prix without starting from the front row, beat Leclerc by 0.141 seconds. The Red Bull driver didn't improve on his second Q3 push, with his Ferrari adversary likewise unable to even match his own opening attempt. And the same was also true for Leclerc's teammate Carlos Sainz, who will line up 3rd on the grid. Verstappen's teammate Sergio Perez did improve with a second Q3 attempt by 0.3, and thus salvaged 4th on the grid ahead of an all-McLaren row 3. Lando Norris qualified ahead of Oscar Piastri in that interim McLaren battle, having initially tried the medium tyre, which he had set the fastest time of yesterday's sprint qualifying on, before pipping Piastri on the soft. 2 more drivers gambled on the medium in Q3, Mercedes duo George Russell and Lewis Hamilton, but that was due to not having any fresh softs left. And Hamilton did improve his time with the yellow walled tyre after his soft tyre Q3 lap was ruined by a big slide, but still ended up just short of 7th placed Russell. Haas driver Nico Hülkenberg maintained a 50% Q3 hit rate this season in 9th, whilst Yuki Tsunoda in the RB concluded the Q3 order in 10th. Lance Stroll made it a clean sweep of qualifying victories over Aston Martin teammate Fernando Alonso in Miami, following up half a 10th sprint qualifying gap with a more emphatic 2/10 Q2 defeat on Saturday. It placed Stroll 11th and Alonso 15th, and the Canadian was just 0.022 seconds away from making Q3. Also mounting a credible Q3 challenge was Alpine, a more competitive package here than usual in 2024, but hindered by neither driver improving on their final Q2 laps. Pierre Gasly led the team in 12th, beating teammate Esteban Ocon by half a 10th for the first time in a Grand Prix qualifying session for this season. Ocon will be joined on row 7 by Alex Albon's Williams, which briefly stopped in Q2 as Albon stood on the brakes after failing to get the car turned through turn 17, complaining of tyres not holding up through the lap. Valtteri Bottas in his Sauber was in 16th, just 0.01 seconds off leaving Alonso's Aston stranded in Q1, and Logan Sargeant in the Williams was close to the cutoff as well. Sargeant, yet to escape Q1 this season, was just a 10th and a bit off of teammate Albon in that session, concluding his final lap with an anguished, "Are we good? Please tell me we're in," message to his team before being informed he'd suffered a Q1 exit again. Danny Rick's excellent sprint race was followed up with a damp squib of a Grand Prix qualifying, as he lapped 3/10 off of teammate Yuki Tsunoda in Q1, saying he had no rear. It meant the 18th fastest time for Ricciardo, and because of his grid penalty from the Chinese Grand Prix, in which he decided to overtake Hülkenberg under the safety car and draw the ire of the stewards, he provisionally is on course to start last. The two drivers he outpaced were Kevin Magnussen in the Haas and Zhou Guanyu in the other Sauber.
The Race F1 Briefing.
Going back to the sprint race now, and Val Hurungi from The Race has taken a little bit of a closer look at the Magnussen and Hamilton battle. Magnussen ended up copping 4 time penalties and 3 penalty points on his licence, taking his total to 8 until the end of the season and beyond, following a visit to the stewards over unsportsmanlike behaviour. He was understandably embarrassed, if unapologetic, over his tactics and was right to feel unease about his mission accomplished drive in Miami. But the real embarrassment belongs to the championship and its officiating, says Val. Magnussen was always going to have a tough time on his hands, keeping Hamilton's Mercedes behind, and had he and Haas known Hamilton's race was doomed anyway by a severe penalty for a 10.7km/h pit lane speeding, none of this would have played out the way it did. But after rebuffing a first Hamilton attack legally, Magnussen skipped across the chicane as he tried to maintain the gap, and he will likely known at that moment that his race, as far as the potential to score points was concerned, was done. Now his race was Hülkenberg's race, and the only meaningful target would be to ensure that his teammate brought home the 2 points for 7th. K-Mag saying, "I just had to create the gap like I did in Jeddah and started using these stupid tactics, which I don't like doing, but at the end of the day, I did my job as a team player, and Nico scored his points because I got that gap for him so Lewis and Tsunoda couldn't catch him. Not the way I like to go racing at all, but it is what I had to do," he said. Hamilton was impressed by Magnussen's explanation and overall took the events of their duel on the chin, saying he wasn't really pissed or anything. As Magnussen alluded to, the team already did something like this in Jeddah and it caught some flack, but it also caught a point. Haas is now up to 7, from a season it began seemingly fearing it would be scoring none in. Those points do not come easy either. F1's top 5 teams are in a class of their own, and RB might well be breaking away from the chasers. 3 teams have no points a quarter of the way into the season, so every scoring opportunity must be maximised here. But Haas can't be blamed, and neither can Magnussen, as clumsy as those moves looked. And really, as Val says, neither can the FIA stewards, because it's not an error mitt to make up penalties befitting of the situation, but just to judge whether or not there has been an infringement and to then assess the penalty prescribed to the specific type of that infringement. But as Val argues, something needs to change to stop this from happening on track. Post-race penalties don't do the job an in-race intervention would have done.
Formula One at its absolute finest on the 60 seconds and last lap. George Russell into the wall and out of the race.
Nothing else comes close at the home of Formula One night racing.
Carlos Sainz, tactical brilliance. Carlos Sainz, the winner of the Singapore Grand Prix.
Watch it live. Formula One Singapore Airlines Singapore Grand Prix, 20th to 22nd September. Book now at singaporegp.sg.
Aston Martin driver Fernando Alonso reckons the Miami Grand Prix weekend has provided an example of how he believes nationality matters in F1 investigation outcomes, and says he will raise his concerns with the FIA president Mohammed bin Sulayem. Alonso, who loudly objected this year to penalties he received in the Australian Grand Prix and the Chinese Grand Prix sprint, indicated he felt singled out in the aftermath of Lewis Hamilton escaping without sanction after an opening lap clash in the Miami sprint. Hamilton dived down the inside of turn 1, and in avoiding action, Alonso collided with teammate Lance Stroll, who was turning in from the outside. The resulting chain reaction led to the retirements of Stroll and McLaren's Lando Norris, while Alonso himself and Hamilton's Mercedes teammate George Russell were two other drivers whose races were obviously compromised. Speaking to Spanish TV channel DAZN after the sprint, Alonso claimed Hamilton would not be penalised because he's not Spanish, despite ruining a few people's races. Hamilton had already been cleared by that point, although the steward's full reasoning for why was still a few hours from being issued. The verdict finished with, however, we were not able to identify one or more drivers wholly or predominantly to blame for the various collisions or any one of them. The stewards also indicated that the decision was influenced by F1's current policy of greater leniency for first lap incidents relative to those on other laps of the race. Speaking after the Grand Prix qualifying session later that day, Alonso had not changed tact. I had to open a gap which led to contact with Stroll because Hamilton was coming from the inside without control of the car. If I do that, for sure, I get the penalty, he protested. And he indicated that he stood by his original claim to DAZN. Yeah, sure. I do feel that nationality matters, and I will be speaking with Mohammed bin Sulayem, with the FIA, whatever. I need to make sure that there's not anything wrong with nationality or anything that can influence any decision. Not only for me, but also for the future generation of Spanish drivers, they need to be protected. Further questioning on the matter was then cut off by Alonso's Aston Martin team. The 4-person stewards panel for the Miami Grand Prix comprises of members from Singapore, Barbados, Italy, and the United States of America. Well, that's it for this episode and an incredibly busy day in Miami, but I'll be back tomorrow to round up all of the on-track race action from the Grand Prix. In the meantime, as always, you can head to our website, therace.com, not forgetting that hyphen, where you can read more about these stories in full, as well as other F1 news and analysis. Thank you so much for your company today. I'm James Baldwin, and this has been The Race F1 Briefing, brought to you by the Singapore Grand Prix, the home of Formula One night racing.
The Athletic.